Okay, we're live.
Hey, I'd like to welcome you to today's ad hoc meeting for the water quality ad hoc committee, water quality ad hoc committee. And today is Friday, April 30th. Do we do roll call for this, Jim?
You can. It's not necessary, but you can.
I guess we don't need to. I see that my compatriot Tom Matoush, who is on the subcommittee with me, is here, and Noah Katz and Kellex Nelson are both here, and our general manager Jim Pruitt. And today's meeting is going to consist of a presentation by the RCD. And Noah, will you be doing the presentation?
I will.
Great. Please proceed.
Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
I do.
Yes.
Great, thanks everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks so much. And for those of you that don't know, my name is Noah Katz and I manage the water quality program at the San Mateo RCD. Try to limit the background here, but just a quick reminder, one of the main drivers for our water quality work with the harbor and the harbor district, going back a couple of decades, is to address chronic bacterial problems at the beach. And the really big news for this year is the Regional Water Quality Control Board's total maximum daily load was approved in February of 2021. And today I'm going to talk to you about what we did this year. I'm going to go into, I'm going to summarize our first flush program, what we found, our big implementation project was the fats, oils, and grease removal program, and talk to you about what we propose to do for the next 2 years. So big project we did this year was we cleaned out that large deposit of fats, oils, and grease from the St. Augustine line. And I'm talking about, we monitored the results, tell you about what we found. We worked with Harbor District staff and attendant to address a restaurant stormwater drain issue. Our first flush program, we engaged and advocated to repair and install signage regarding water quality, and that is an ongoing project. We engaged extensively with the TMDL, and really importantly, we determined sand to be a secondary source of bacteria at Capistrano Beach. First flush, also called First Rain, program went really well this year. We had 20 volunteers go out during the first big rain of the year, sampled 12 sites, 4 of which discharged to Pillar Point Harbor. We initially had 5 sites. We planned for Pillar Point Harbor, but St. Augustine line, it was high tide and we just couldn't safely sample it. So we just got West Point Avenue ditch, Vassar Avenue, Capistrano outfall, and inner harbor parking. And just a quick summary of the results. All sites were above the water quality objectives for bacteria and orthophosphates, which is an important nutrient.
Now, when you say, pardon me, Noah, when you say above, you mean as in it's good or as in it's bad? Just
Thank
to
you,
clarify.
Kellex. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was, that's bad. So the water quality objectives are the upper level where we want to see contaminants. So being above that is bad. So all sites were in the bad zone above water quality objectives for bacteria. They were in the good zone for nitrates. And then something new this year, 2 sites, both in Princeton, were above those recommended ranges for heavy metals. And we've been doing this program since 2003 and never seen metals above those levels. So this is something to look at in the future. And then some potential good news, the Capistrano outfall may be going in a downward trend, still above the water quality objective, so still in the bad zone, but something to keep an eye out in the future. And then our big project this year, we removed a large deposit of fats, oils, and grease from the St. Augustine stormwater line. And you can see an image of that deposit, this kind of yellowy image in the top center here. And just a little bit of backstory, in 2017, 2018, we CCTV'd the stormwater system at the Harbor District. So we actually sent in a little camera to look at all the stormwater lines, looking for cracks or defects, and these might be sources of cross-contamination. So places where groundwater or maybe even water from sewage systems can leak into the stormwater system and cause contaminated outfalls to the stormwater line. In that CCTV work, we found 2 segments of stormwater line that were in need of repair and were subsequently fixed. We also found 4 segments of pipe that will be needed for repair in the near future. And I'm going to talk to you about those in our next steps segment. And then there was one section of the stormwater system that we could not inspect, and this was due to a large deposit of fats, oils, and grease in the stormwater line of St. Augustine, and basically our camera truck just couldn't even get through it. So in 2019, we had a new manhole installed to facilitate cleaning of the fats, oils, and grease. And this map on the bottom here around the center of it, you can see where we installed that new manhole. And then last year in 2020, we removed the fats, oils, and grease using a vacuum truck, similar to the image shown in the top right. And in terms of our CCTV work, this was a big success. We were able to complete our inspection of the stormwater system on Harbor District property, and great news, we did not find any new areas that were in need of repair or replacement. But I'm sure the big question you're all asking yourselves right now, all wondering about, is how did this project impact bacteria? And before I get into the data a little bit, I just want to remind you of our kind of primary operating theory, but the reason we wanted to remove these fats, oils, and grease. And this obviously, besides the really simple reason of why you'd want to remove a pretty disgusting giant fatberg clogging a 6-foot pipe that discharges to the harbor. And this is all about bacteria. So as you might remember from last year's presentation, we consider fats, oils, and grease to be a secondary source of bacteria. And this is in contrast to those primary sources, which are, the feces of warm-blooded animals that can contribute these bacteria to the system. And they're really important because they tell us about pathogens that can make people sick. So going back to those secondary sources, these are areas where the fecal indicated bacteria can kind of harbor, it can live, but it's not necessarily related to those primary sources, and it's not related necessarily to viruses, pathogens that can make people sick. So when we analyze water samples, we have our lab look at it in two different ways. One, we look at concentrations of fecal indicator bacteria, such as E. coli and Enterococcus. And the other thing we do is this technique called microbial source tracking, or MST. And this allows us to do a DNA analysis for specific animal markers in this water sample. So we can look for, is there human DNA? Is there dog DNA, etc. And the other thing that we have our lab look for is something called universal MST. And the universal MST marker tells us two things. One, it tells us, qualitatively, generally, are there sources we didn't test for? So kind of, is there other stuff present in this sample? And then the other really important thing, and this is something that we've learned by reviewing the available scientific literature, is that secondary sources, things like sands, sediments, soils, fats, oils, and grease, are areas that can harbor sources or sinks for this universal MST marker. So universal MST marker commonly found in secondary sources. And the two metrics for success of this project in terms of bacteria, one, lower fecal indicator bacteria after fog removal. We did not see this, and I'm going to walk you through what that means and why that might be in a little bit. And then the other metric for success is lower universal MST marker concentrations after fog removal. So those two metrics for success, again, are lower fecal indicator bacteria after we remove the fats, oils, and grease, and lower universal MST after we remove the fats, oils, and grease. So that second metric for success, universal MST decrease, we did see this, and you can see this graph on the bottom right here underneath the photo of the St. Augustine outfall. And these two big bars all the way to the left are before we removed the fats, oils, and grease. So we collected a sample at low tide and a sample at high tide. And you can see those numbers are way up there in the millions of bacteroidales, millions of universal MST markers. And then we did two sampling events after fog removal, and we can see those numbers are much lower. So that's really good news in terms of those metrics for success. Some of the other good news from this project, we found evidence of human DNA in the high tide samples, but not in the low tide samples. Those low tide samples are coming straight from the St. Augustine line. We did not find evidence of human in the St. Augustine line. Great news. Similarly, we did not find evidence of dog DNA in the St. Augustine line or in the high tide samples. So also good news. And then again, going back to this metric of success, really huge decline in universal MST following fog removal, which tells us that our theory was correct. That big kind of globule of fats, oils, and grease in the St. Augustine line was an area where universal MST and bacteria can live. It could be a source and a sink for those things. And we saw much less of that MST marker following fog removal. So then going into the actual bacteria data, the fecal indicator bacteria, we have Enterococcus on the left and E. coli on the right. And the black line shows when we remove the fats, oils, and grease. So the left of it is before and the right of the black line is after. And you can see that actually after we remove the fats, oils, and grease, we actually see higher bacteria in some instances. And there are many reasons why this could be. One of the main, most likely theories is that the fats, oils, and grease actually acted as kind of a fat dam. So really low flows, contaminated flows from upstream of the deposit of fog were actually inhibited by that dam. And when we removed that dam, it allowed those really low contaminated flows to move unimpeded to the stormwater outfall. And you can imagine that since they're very small volumes of water and they're undiluted, that they would have high concentrations of bacteria. Another reason could be that because it was low flows, I actually had to use a little red sampling cup, and I may have gotten a tiny bit of sediment in the sample in that second sampling date there. And there are other reasons such as tidal flushing, and so that could be carrying pollutants from the marine water into the outfall, and then we're sampling that when it's coming out. It could be related to sediment at the Capistrano outfall, contaminants from the Capistrano outfall itself. Essentially what this shows is that there are, and unsurprisingly, there are many, many sources in this complex system. And we're still seeing evidence of that. And, you know, going back to those two metrics of success, the precipitous decline in universal MST, that shows us that, again, our theory was correct, that it supports our theory that the fats, oils, and grease is where that universal MST was hanging on to. And in removing those fats, oils, and grease, remove that deposit of those bacteria. But we are seeing other sources that we have yet to identify and eliminate. But all in all, I would say this project is a success. And before I move on to the next steps, does anyone have any questions or anything I can clarify on that? I know it was a little bit technical.
Yeah, no, can I just ask on the St. Augustine line, what are the human contamination sources at high tide?
I don't know for sure, but you know, I've heard that there's someone living there. Sometimes it could be dumping. There could be an illicit connection in the Capistrano outfall itself. You know, we don't have a ton of the MST sampling from Capistrano. We have some limited evidence of human there, but we haven't ruled it out. But this is just a few extra data points to say that we haven't found it in the St. Augustine line itself.
So the St. Augustine and the Capistrano outfall, they're close enough that they can cross-contaminate?
I believe so, yes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, and the county's sampling site, their routine weekly sampling, they sample right in the middle of the two outfalls. So that data doesn't give us high enough resolution to say, you know, which is doing what at what time. But this is definitely good to see no human detected at St. Augustine. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, I'll move on. So getting on to next steps, I mentioned that in 2017-18, when we did our CCTV project, we found some areas of pipes that will need repairs or replacement. And these are things that are going to need attention within 5 to 10 years of that 2017-2018 timeline. So obviously we're approaching that 5-year mark, and these are areas in the South stormwater system. I find kind of interesting and exciting is that these are actually, you can see where the DI1 to the outfall, DI3 to the outfall segment is actually one of our first flush sites. It's the Inner Harbor parking site. So I think that when we give that some attention and some repair, that's actually something that we'll be really able to measure with our first flush program, which is pretty exciting. And we'd like to, in the next year, really enter the planning phase for those projects and hope to do the implementation phase the following year. Last year, in our scope of work, we wanted to monitor the results, the impacts of the county's plan to line the Capistrano pipe. This was something that's been put on the back burner due to the shelter-in-place orders, but the county's still planning on doing this, and we'd still like to monitor the impacts of that. And that's something the county will pay for. We'd like to assist watershed residents and businesses on some water quality management, manure practices, And that's something that we'll do off of Harbor District property and with funding from other organizations. And we'd like to identify and recommend some treatment and filtration options to control bacteria, and then recommend some best management practices for dumpsters and trash cans and things, and work with Harbor District tenants on that. And we'd like to assist in some of the TMDL regulation, compliance, engagement. I had a meeting with Jim the other day about a potential partnership with some of the other entities in the TMDL watersheds, about getting together and figuring out how we can apply for grants or pool resources for implementation projects with organizations like SAM and GCSD and San Mateo County Office of Sustainability. So I'm looking forward to pursuing that project. And then some of the TMDL implementation actions that we'd like to help with are evaluating the sewage collection systems, inspecting sewer lines and stormwater laterals, and begin to enhance some stormwater control efforts from loading docks and dumpsters. And then maybe I'd like to pool that with our efforts on the south stormwater system. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment, but I'd like to pursue some new funding sources for special studies, and that's to address some of our kind of lingering research questions about where bacteria might be coming from. We propose to continue our education and outreach efforts. We have our pet waste outreach program, which the County Office of Sustainability is pursuing buy-in from several of the TMDL entities to try to pool resources, maximize reach for pet waste outreach. And we hope that the Harbor District will take part in that, and we can all work together on reducing pet waste getting into ocean water, into the harbor. We'd just like to implement our storm drain art program. We'll apply for a grant for that. And we'd like to conduct our annual First Flush program with shared resources from the Harbor District, Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side, and potentially City of Pacifica. And we'd like to do more outreach to businesses about washing and dumping into storm drains, and continue our efforts for signage. This is an ongoing project, not only working to repair damaged signage, but also to work on general signage on Harbor District property. And last but not least, we'd like to provide technical assistance as required and as it comes up to the Harbor District. We want to be your on-call people to help you with water quality issues as they come up. And help you with general communications issues, and as new problems arise, find solutions. And I mentioned those special studies. So these are some lingering questions that we had in last year's presentation, and these are things that we have yet to quantify or fully understand, such as, and Nancy, this goes to your question, human in the stormwater system, such as at Capistrano, understanding to what extent beach sand at Capistrano is a secondary source, quantifying the wildlife contribution, and looking for other hotspots for cross-contamination in the stormwater system. And these are things that were loosely referenced in the TMDL under special studies. And so rather than jumping on these with Harbor District funding in the last year, we decided to put a hold on these and try to diversify funding sources to kind of decrease the Harbor District investment and try to bring in some funding from other sources. And this is a slide you'll recognize from last year as well, which we had included last year to show, how much money we've leveraged through the Harbor District's initial investment. And this is here again to talk about how we see that investment going down in the future and the return going up as more entities in the TMDL take part, and we create new partnerships. So we're hoping that to see the Harbor District still play in a leadership role, still work with us and work with other entities, but we hope that their investment will go down somewhat. And then our budget proposal, there is around 60K left in the budget from last year. Some of the reasons we were able to be under budget was pushing those special studies forward a little bit to try to diversify funding. And obviously the Capistrano lining did not take place. Anyway, so in fiscal year 2022, projected budget is about 70K. So really we'd like to ask last year's budget be rolled into this year with an additional 10 grand in investment. So we can begin the planning phase for those south stormwater system repairs, some of those TMDL implementation actions, pursuing partnerships, pursuing funding sources for special studies, identifying those treatment and filtration options, carrying out our education and outreach efforts, and recommending best management practices. And then in fiscal year 23, we would like to get into the implementation phase for some of the above listed projects. We don't have a clear estimate for that, but I think $100,000 for fiscal year 23 is a pretty good ballpark figure. So additional funds requested for the next 2 years of work are $110,000, including the existing budget from last year. And thank you very much. That's my presentation. Open up to questions.
So I was just curious, we've all seen how the Board of Supervisors approved the RV park that's going to tie into a lot of those lines. And I wonder if we could make sure that that entire operation kicks a lot of funding, because there's going to be a lot of tie-in. There's going to be a lot of opportunity, a lot of motorhomes, people, things impacting this whole system. What do you have a plan right now to contact either the Board of Supervisors or the people that are running that project and get a funding source from them?
That's a great question, great point. I do not currently have a plan for that. I would certainly hope that they would. I mean, I know that if it's a new facility, they'll be, making sure everything new is up to date. I'm not sure about them contributing to existing facilities, but that's definitely a great point. It's something we can look at.
I just, it's been forever that the Harbor District seems to be picking up the tab on a lot of these. And you look at where all these lines are coming from. The harbor is a holder in due course, that none of this stuff originates in the harbor. So I'd really like to see more activity from the county, the Board of Supervisors, and different funding sources to leverage the funds that we give you along the lines of that other package that you saw.
Are you asking them that? So
you guys to go for that.
you want us to ask the, let me just get clear. So you want us to ask the county to get the RV park to pay for what? Who's tracking?
The different studies that you're doing. When you talked about, there was the research studies, and I think you needed some other studies as well. When we talk about all the infrastructure, there's a whole lot of things. If you're going to have hookups, there's going to be a massive new series of pipes. And how and where is that going to hook up and tie in? And there's a lot of things that haven't been addressed in my mind with the RV park.
Yeah, I don't know entirely how much we're a fit for the specific thing that you're talking about. So we do a lot to try to leverage Harbor District investment with our conversations with the county regarding, funding sources where people have impact or responsibilities or jurisdictions or authorities or interests. I don't know. I'm not and maybe entirely seeing the direct nexus, because we haven't been finding we're not seeing evidence of chronic sources of bacteria, which is the thing that we look into, that are associated with human inputs. So we're not seeing human waste or sewage. And I think what you're talking about is the tie-ins between the RVs waste, human waste, and the sanitary district, right? The sewage management.
Well, that
And we're talking about
come down and bring their dogs and cats in their RVs with them.
right. So what our data have found, what our data are indicating so far that we've seen, our data and the data from others, is we're not seeing clear evidence of human waste being a chronic source of bacteria. And also, we haven't seen that like dog waste or pet waste at the harbor or like on the beaches or that sort of thing is really the issue. We're seeing it more coming from the upper watershed. So I don't know that there's quite the nexus that you're hoping for with that ask. We could certainly, in our conversations with the county, we could bring that up, but when we're seeking additional resources or funding from the county, it's less about, since we're a non-regulatory entity, it's less about asking the county to leverage fees on somebody else or require something, but we ask the county for direct investments. We ask the county for money to do this work or that work, or we ask the county for their in-kind services to like flush the lines or line the stormwater, or, you know, make infrastructure or capital improvements on their own dime. Those are the kinds of investments that we're more likely to be able to seek from the county. If we saw problems from like the RV park, we would certainly, like, undeniably, if we saw a problem from the coming from like a chronic source of bacteria, something coming from the RV park, or even something that was episodic and a big concern, we would certainly go try to provide them with the technical assistance to mitigate that, or even ask for their investment in that. We haven't seen anything that's putting us in that direction currently.
I just see, Noah, can you go back to where all the pipelines were, some of those diagrams?
Sure.
Because if we look, you can see the new restaurant and all this, and then actually, I think that I've seen maps that show, I forget the name of the restaurant that's been abandoned now across the highway. And we look at some of the streams that we've looked at in the past. I just want to make sure we're taking a large enough look to make sure we're not leaving something out that may be a problem in the future.
Commissioner
Is
Mateusz.
is there something that you think might be missing, Tom? Is there something we should add to this?
I'm just saying the Board of Supervisors has to know that you've got that, right now it's in the center at the top, but there's also the lines that come across from what used to be the restaurant Moon Bay. And I remember some of the other lines that we've discovered as we built the complex of all these different lines here and there and inspection spots.
I wonder, Tom, are you talking about sewer lateral lines?
Well, isn't that what some of these are?
No, these are all stormwater lines. So
Okay.
these are just stormwater.
All right.
And Tom, if I can add a little more context to it, and Kellex and Noah, correct me if I'm wrong, but in looking at all the diagrams and the watershed areas for the different outfalls in the harbor, the Capistrano outfall, which is kind of center on Capistrano Beach, is mainly a catchment or the watershed of the one development, the hotel and the restaurants, and that RV park also falls into that one catchment area, which is Capistrano outfall. So definitely, as we test the water and we look at the water coming out of the storm system from the Capistrano outfall, it'd be very evident on where that's coming from within or what property it's coming from. So it's a much more easy identification process, and we can work with and partner with, and it's our plan to the property owner for that entire development, the hotel, restaurants, and RV park. With respect to the sewer lines going in, they are installing a new restroom and shower facility, laundry facility, but all that will be regulated and watched by the Granada Community Services District and to ensure that that's done correctly and tested.
Oh, that's all really good to
Speak
know.
to Noah, can you speak to the Capistrano drainage, what that covers?
So I'm not 100% sure about the RV park, but I think what else Jim said was correct. It's a really small drainage area. It's mainly those businesses and a tiny some fields on the other end.
And that's where the RV park is.
Okay, thank you. And I would say, you know, the focus of my presentation today was really on Harbor District property, and you know, some of these things included you know, things that were required implementation actions from the TMDL, and there are each of the other entities, including, you know, GCSD and SAM and those businesses also have implementation actions, you know, in the county. So I did not focus on what their requirements will be. I'm not as familiar with those requirements as I am for the Harbor District, but it's certainly something that we're interested in understanding where pollution is coming from. But we're really interested in using, you know, Harbor District funding to address issues on Harbor District property.
And specifically, that was in response to a request from the Harbor District. So Just to remind folks, I'm sorry I keep going on and off video. I don't mean to confuse things. It's that I finally got to eat lunch and I didn't want to like eat it on video here. So just a reminder that we've gone through phases of expanding and contracting our scope. So there was a period of time when the Harbor District was really interested in understanding essentially level of responsibility for the district, like what was coming from your property versus what was coming from other places across, through, or under your property. And so there were periods of time when our agreement with you involved a lot of work that was off of Harbor District property. And then in more recent years, you wanted us to contract and just focus on what you can do on your property. And so we've done that. And we're nimble. You know, we can do what it is that you want, but just to be clear that that the reason that we've been focusing on your property is because you wanted to, that was what you guys were feeling was the most cost-effective use of your funds for a while there. And if you want us to change that, we can, but this is responding to that direction.
And it's my intent to, as we work with the RCD and this water quality and the water coming onto the property, that is not originating in the harbor, is to, again, work with them as technical experts and get technical assistance in dealing with our partners and our adjacent property owners to address some of the issues that are causing the pollution. And most definitely looking to them to fund their own issues, vice the district funding them.
Right. Right. On that subject, Noah, for the implementation phase for 23, since we know that the contamination isn't coming from our facilities, what, can you go back to that implementation phase for 2023? Is that the one? Yeah. It looks like, I thought there was another slide, maybe not. But it looks like what that phase includes is basically just looking at our facilities and making sure that it was a slide right after this. Is there something right after this? No. Yeah. No. Yeah. Was that it? No. No.
That's next steps for implementation projects.
Yeah. Where did it go?
Wait, no, why don't you go slowly? Go from the beginning. We'll go slowly through. When we see the slide, we can stop there.
It's past that. No. Yeah. No.
Okay.
No. Oh, no. 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 Oh. Hold on. Go back for a sec. Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe it's one more.
This is this
Nope. No, one more.
The implementation slide.
One more.
It was the one that was next steps implementation.
Oh, is this the one?
One more. No, that's it.
Yeah. This is it. Thank you. So yes, so it's looking at best management practices. Have we not ever looked at that before?
We have looked at that before. I want to look at them in more detail and make recommendations and work on outreach efforts for those as well.
Sorry, no, you swallowed the end of that sentence. Can you say that again?
Oh, sorry. We have looked at these in the past. These are things we'd like to look at again, and you have to look at everything again and make new recommendations for specific businesses and do outreach.
Okay.
To them.
I would
Okay,
say,
so-
can I elaborate on that a little bit, Nancy? I think that there's some types of BMPs we looked at and others that we didn't.
Right.
So there was some information that we didn't have. We needed to answer a few questions to make sure. There's been conversation about BMPs since I got involved in this like 15 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So people there were a lot of people, oh, we should do this. We should try that. We should do this. We should try that. And the RCD was basically saying, why don't we make sure that the BMPs are led by the science? And that'll be probably iterative. So we did some scoping of some sewer lines, found a big clog of fats, oils, and grease, removed it. We asked the county to flush some stormwater lines. That's a BMP that they implemented. We found an issue with one of your tenants and worked with the Harbor District and the tenant to change their practices. That's a BMP. So as we've continued to answer key questions, that enables us to develop new BMPs that are going to be effective rather than a sort of a scattershot feel-good approach that can waste money and resources.
Okay, well, I so much appreciate your work and everything that we're all learning from what you do. Since we have found that the contamination sources aren't coming from our properties, of course, we have great interest in spreading around the cost of mitigation rather than this all just falls under the Harbor District's budget. So when looking at the implementation going forward, one of the asterisk items is assist watershed residents and businesses, including stormwater and manure.
You know what? I don't know if Noah mentioned what the asterisks mean. The asterisks means that's where we're getting other people to pay for it. So the asterisks are the leveraged things where other people are.
And I think
Great.
I think I can add a little bit of clarification. I removed a slide just to kind of streamline this thing, but I think I'll put it back, I think, for the May 19th presentation. I just want to just add 2 clarifying points. One, so these implementation actions here, the 4, the kind of coded DI3 to outfall down to SAB to outfall, those are areas of stormwater system on Harbor District property that we found would need repairs in the future. So those are areas on Harbor District property that if they're not repaired in the next, 5 years at the latest, will probably contribute to water quality impacts. And so that's an area on Harbor District property that the Harbor District needs to take care of. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, and this is a slide I removed. So we really focus on chronic sources, right? So we're trying to understand those big hitters. And Kelly, I'll put this back in the next iteration. So we're trying to understand what are the really big contributors to the chronic beach problems. What are the sources that we can eliminate to have the biggest impact? The TMDL does not look at sources through the same lens. What they do is they look at every single potential source that can be controlled by all entities in the watersheds. And so things like on this one, inspect sewer and stormwater laterals, that's something we've already begun doing. We inspected the stormwater system and it took us until recently to do the entire thing, but that's something that we've done. So these are things that we need to inspect the sewer laterals. We need to, these are things that are not shown through our research to be chronic sources, but are requirements in the TMDL. So it's I don't know, it's an important distinction.
So I think that, so Nancy, I think our first slide says, and we probably breezed through it a little bit, but we said that the drivers for our work has always been about chronic sources. The TMDL, once the water body has been listed as impaired by bacteria, the water board isn't limited to whether or not it's chronic. They're going to address bacteria, and they have a much broader net. So some of the things that we're talking about are things that you're going to be required to do. It's probably not a bad idea to start getting ahead of it before there's regulatory implications of it. But not only that, but some of these are things that where we can't rule out that they have some issues associated with them, even if they're not like a significant chronic source. But also we had prioritized them for you because we anticipate a reasonable likelihood that they will fail, and you don't want to wait for them to fail and have oh, there's your bike.
Nice.
Some people have pictures of their kids. Noah has his bike. And his baby is adorable. Anyway, so these are things where we want to make sure that you prevent something that is a significant bacterial input, and it's where we saw where it was our recommendation that you're going to need to figure out how to address these things.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, thanks, Kelly. So, well, it sounds like you're aware of what our concerns are, and that going forward, when we're looking at projects, we're going to, be looking very closely at the same things, and that's good. We all need to be on the same page. I did also just want to touch base quickly about signage updates. Noah, has there been any update on the Capistrano outfall signage? Any movement from the county on that?
No, no movement yet. I'm still in conversations with John Allen at Office of Sustainability and Greg Smith at Public Health. I'm still trying to get to the bottom of that.
Well, what is the delay? Is it really that challenging to fix a defaced sign and make, this public health issue? Why the delay?
I really wish I could answer that question, Nancy. I don't.
It's a county thing, huh?
So Noah, when you say you're still working on getting to the bottom of it, what was the last conversation you had, and what were the next steps?
So I think we're still trying to find which department will take responsibility for it and repair the sign. It's confusing. Well, my contact at Office of Sustainability is still trying to figure out if it's Department of Public Works or Public Health that is responsible for that sign.
So they've been jawboning that now for what, 10 months? When did I first send an email about this? July? That's a little,
Do you want to wait for the county, Nancy, or do you want to put up a sign?
well, I don't know if we even have, is that within our jurisdiction, Jim? And here's the other problem that I see with doing that is that then we are accepting responsibility for it. It's not on our property. What are your thoughts, Jim? You're muted.
Correct. It's not on our property. It's in Princeton and unincorporated county. It's on a concrete retaining wall when they built Capistrano Avenue there. And it's next to the pipe. And somebody spray painted it red. So it needs to be cleaned or replaced. And the county's arguing or lamenting over who owns that responsibility. And they just haven't got back to us and hasn't been a priority. The other signs that the county puts up for contaminated beaches, those signs are still there.
One of the things,
That not only the RCD write the county and the health department and directly request prompt action. And both of us, so that we're both coming in with saying, look at how long you guys have been jumping this ball. And at some point we can't let them off the hook. We got to start holding some people's feet to the fire to make something happen.
Yeah, how can we at the district do that on a district level too? I don't know how, when you're in touch with them, Noah, but can we put something on the calendar that we ping them every 3 weeks and just hassle them until they finally take care of this?
We can reignite this issue again and the committee.
Sick the dogs on them?
I have a meeting with my contact at the Office of Sustainability on May 4th, so I will remind them that this is ongoing. Another thing we had spoken about was a kind of general signage idea on Harbor District property that would be managed by the harbor. And that is something that we were just having trouble finding the right language and design for that. It needs to be in reference to the bacterial monitoring data. But anyway, Kellex and I passed some ideas back and forth and didn't land on something, but we'll pick that back up again.
Do we have a time frame for that? When were we looking at doing something like that?
We did not have a time frame for that.
Okay.
But that's something that I'd love to pick up. Another thing I was going to bring up is it'd be great to have I don't know, kind of more regular check-ins with the water quality committee, the Harbor District, just to, so I can, when you have new concerns, I can respond to them more proactively.
Oh, I'd be happy to meet every month or chat, or at least, you and I chat or have this ad hoc committee meet, whatever. This is of great interest. this is a very important, this stuff is really important. Has countywide importance and implications, and I'm, very interested in seeing us move forward productively in every way that we can.
That's great to hear, Nancy. Yeah, so am I. And yeah, Tom, you're available. We could meet, maybe not every month, but maybe every other month. And I don't know, available and
I scared you, huh? But do keep me in the loop, Noah, too, if you just want to email me, and then I'm happy to keep Tom, or, Tom and I, however you want to do it.
great.
Yeah, and the Harbor District overlaps several of the supervisors. So attack one with a message and a reminder saying, here's the departments we're having trouble with. I mean, there isn't an excuse to wait 10 months for this.
Yeah. Yeah, the last I heard, public health was getting involved. And I don't know what happened to that, but I don't know how, I don't really believe that the Office of Sustainability is going to have a lot of leverage on this. I think we have to get yeah, well, let's see. I might make some phone calls too. All right, any other questions? No.
Yeah, I have some questions about, how would you like us or recommend that we change or tailor a presentation to the broader group?
I think this was really helpful today because it was more targeted on specifically what we've done since last year, where we are for this year and where we are going forward. I thought it was great. What do you think, Tom?
I picked up on the fact that we probably should really early on make a very clear distinction between sewer lines and storm lines.
Oh, yeah.
And that we should be clear that the asterisks mean it's where other people are making contributions.
Yeah,
where
good.
it's leverage.
Important.
And we should probably just note that there have been periods of kids, I'm working. Cricket, mommy's working. I'm sorry. This pandemic. I know this is being recorded. You're probably going to post it. Can you edit? Oh, whatever. What was I saying? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Let's see. The asterisks, and then
the expansion and contraction. How our scope has changed over time.
Oh, yeah.
How sometimes our work has been focused on like beyond your property and sometimes within, and that this last period of time is really focusing on within your property. Because I think it's just human nature that when we talk about the big picture, people say, yeah, but let's focus here. And when we just focus here, people say, well, what about these other things? And so we should probably contextualize that. So it's clear that we are aware that there's land beyond your boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And we will shift again. We'll shift back and forth. It looks like in 22 will be more, or 23 will be more focused again on our specific property. Yeah.
And I think maybe also in the beginning slide, when we talk about the chronic sources of bacteria, we should note that while the driver for our work originally with you is about chronic sources of bacteria, the TMDL, once a body has been listed, means that you have to look at any potential likely source of bacteria, whether or not it's chronic currently or could be.
Or likely.
Yes.
Yeah. I will put that slide back in there. And on that slide, I'll talk about how the Harbor District is proactively doing some of those, several of those implementation actions already. So it's not, it's not an entirely new set of lists, a new set of actions. So.
And I'd like to just say that aside from the science of this, which is fascinating, and the health implications, which are very important, the Harbor District also has a PR issue with regard to water quality. People see there's water quality issues on the San Mateo coastline, and somehow the finger is always, even if the issue is in Pacifica, the finger is always pointed at the harbor district. And so the more information we can get out to the public and other entities, the more entities that we can get involved in this discussion, the better.
So one of the things that another needle that we thread is how much to go into the backstory, you know, because a lot of people have heard aspects of this presentation many times before.
Mhm.
I've got a very loud child in the background. I'm sorry if it's distracting.
No,
It is not.
Okay.
can't hear it.
Okay, it is for me, but thank you. You know, so we don't want to always like run through everything that we've done, but we also want people to get that story, Nancy, that like,
Yeah.
it's not like this is just endless studies. This is ongoing refining our understanding and taking appropriate actions with each new level of understanding. So maybe we can put some sort of simple table in there that's just like, here's what's been done. Like, this isn't new. There's been actions taken.
Yes, and every time you talk about the harbor district's involvement, there may be a way to talk about how the harbor district has spearheaded these efforts, in spite of the fact that the harbor district is not to blame for the contamination.
Actually, I do. I think, but you've been in meetings when you've heard me say that, right, Nancy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I say that all the time. Like, this is what's happened with state parks and Pescadero Marsh. This is like all the time. The entity, it's that where you see the problems happening, like the receiving waters, is not the source of the problem. You don't blame the receptacle that accepts the sins of the watershed.
Yes.
And-
Oh, that's, yes.
Yeah, if we
I
could
had not heard that phrase. That's a good one. What, Tom?
if we could just have that a little stronger. But
Yeah,
I thought in this report that it did seem that finally we're saying we're not causing it. That's when I said earlier, we're the holder in due course. And I'd just like to see a little bit stronger statement along those lines.
Well, we've said that a lot, many times, but we should be clear on what our goals are for this presentation. So what we were told was not to like repeat the stuff from the past, but just focus on what we've done this past year. And so we've been focusing on presenting sort of the science and implementation. What you're talking about is a little bit more PR messaging kind of stuff. And so that's a different presentation. We might be able to include an element of that. But I also just want to be clear that some of these things are your responsibility. And so like you really do need to upgrade those storm lines. Like, you're going to need to address those. Those are capital projects, you know. And you know, I think we can definitely do that, but it's not like a free pass, you know what I mean? Like, there's things that the harbor district needs to continue to manage. We did find problems coming from one of your tenants, and you know, work to fix that. There was a huge, disgusting, like human height clog of grease in a storm line that was coming from your property. And that was a likely secondary source of bacteria. So there are some things that have been your responsibility. And I think it is fair to say that you have been very proactive in addressing them.
Yeah, and I
we
think
can-
then
We can message
I'm-
that.
you can expect that we will continue to be. Noah and Kellex, I think your presentation today was perfect. It was excellent. And it's given us the opportunity to discuss our concerns and, you know, ask questions. Going forward, we, you know, all the commissioners are very much behind being responsive to the work that we need to do on our properties. That's not going to change.
What I wonder if we should have is one slide at the end. Even the stirring is loud. Can you stir? Like, who stirs a cup that loudly?
We couldn't hear it.
I'm working, honey, I'm working. So maybe what we could do is have a final slide that that has like the bottom line takeaways. bacteria is complicated. It takes ongoing management. The harbor is the receiving water, not a primary or chronic source. Where the harbor district has been proactive, and where we find things, the harbor district is addressing them. And there's a lot of responsibilities that are off of harbor district property. Make a distinction between chronic and potential or episodic. Like, I think some of these themes that are coming up, we could just have like one final slide that's like, okay, so here you've looked at all this. What do we want you to take away? If there's like a couple things we want you to walk away with, these are the basic messages. And we could have a slide that has those.
That'd be helpful. I think that's great.
I think my useful time here has come to an end because I have to shift to parenting.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for your help, and thank you, Noah. I think we can call it a day. And
I just have one
good.
comment. Excuse me. The ask of the board for this is going to be for continued budget support and teamwork with the RCD. And Noah put up a slide that had budget request where out of the approved budget for year 21-22, there was $6,000 remaining. That money basically disappears June 1st. So because the board approved it for this fiscal year, not next fiscal year.
Okay.
So if you can, you can highlight the fact that you were able to accomplish everything we need to do this year under budget, and you didn't utilize $60,000. However, going into fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24, you're asking for a total amount of I think, was that 180?
110.
110 plus the 60,000, right?
Yeah, 110 total.
Okay. I thought it was an addition.
I'm sorry. What are the? Sorry. What am I missing? Now I'm doubting myself.
Because you said 110 with the 60,000 from the previous contract.
It's the 60. I'm sorry. It is plus the 60.
So
Oh,
it'd
I'm
be,
sorry, I got that wrong.
so it'd be 170 for the next 2 fiscal years.
That's right.
Because the board only approved it for the fiscal year we're currently in, so it kind of disappears. So the budget request is going to be for fiscal year 2020, 22-23 and 23-24 for a total amount of 170. If I did my math right.
Yes, that's correct. Sorry about that.
And highlight the fact that we were able to do everything we needed to do this year for $60,000 under budget.
Yeah, that's the plus. Jim, how typical is it for harbor districts to be spending, between $50,000 and $100,000 a year on water quality issues? Is that pretty typical?
I don't know, Nancy. I would have to research that, but all harbors have the significant water quality issues up and down the coast.
Yeah, I mean, that might be worth looking into a little bit just in terms of helping the board make these decisions every year.
I'd be interested in learning that too.
Yeah, I would be interested as well. And does that seem like a reasonable request, Jim? Does that seem like something that?
From my perspective, it's a reasonable request, and I'll be recommending the board approve it. The question now is for the board, or for this committee, is are we going to forward this full presentation and request to the full board for May 19th?
I think that sounds good. And especially, with the questions that we've raised and the changes that Noah and Kellex came up with. So that sounds good.
I think it's good too. I just have to, I get a raised eyebrow when I'm asked to spend more of the harbor district's money when we've got so many pressing issues on capital improvement and everything else. So I just say, okay, well,
Yeah.
we spend more, where are we going to get it? What are we going to cut?
Yeah, well, that's always true.
And the replacing those lines themselves are capital improvements, or
Right.
moving towards that. And I think that once the TMDL is in place, you're not going to have a choice. It's no longer going to be your choice about how to allocate your resources. You're going to be obligated under the basin plan. You're going to be obligated in law to implement some of these things. So the extent to which you can really demonstrate that you're proactive in addressing these things, the more that you can do that, I think the less the tool will be a regulatory hammer, and the more it's going to be based on, goodwill and partnership and that sort of thing.
Well, that comes back down exactly though to where RCD is looking for funding resources, and we're always looking for funding sources. We've got people looking for grants, and this isn't something that we just pull out of our hat and say, hey, I think we'll do something else instead of the pipes. We're aware of our responsibilities. However, it's dollars and cents.
Yeah. Okay,
Muted. Based on the feedback from Commissioner Matoush and Commissioner Ryring, I'll go ahead and draft a draft report for the committee and forward it on to the full board in May.
great. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Kellex. And thank you, Tom, for your time.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
You
everybody.
too.
All right.